So now it's my great pleasure to welcome the last session of our two-day summit. Suzanne Vranica of the Wall Street Journal is going to interview Rishad Tobaccowala, who's the author of Restoring the Soul of Business. Great title here. The subtitle, Staying Human in an Age of Data. So now Rishad is also a senior advisor to Publicis Groupe, where he's worked for many years. And if you don't know about it, he has a great weekly blog called The Future Does Not Fit into the Containers of the Past. So I highly recommend it. So let's welcome Suzanne and Rishad.
Hello, my friend. Good to see you. Thanks for joining me today, Rishad.
Likewise.
So I'm going to dig right in here, and I promise I'm going to try not to mention cross-screen measurement because my head is about to explode, but we'll go from there. Anyway, just kidding. 2021. It's supposed to be a calmer year, Rishad, but yet COVID still rages. There was an insurrection in DC. Investors last week were jumping into stocks like Blockbuster Video. Tech giants are facing countless antitrust suits, and new privacy efforts basically could mean the end of one-to-one marketing, and it's only February. Given that you're now the Oracle of Madison Avenue, or at least been designated that, I want you to sort of step back and take a look at the past year that we've been through. What do you think has been the most significant change to consumer behavior that you believe will have basically a profound effect on marketing for years to come?
So thanks again for interviewing me. I would say that the biggest single change is the fact that all of us have had to change our behavior for 12 months. And we are likely to change our behavior or have our behavior change for another 6, which is 18 months. And whenever someone changes their behavior, they start rethinking almost every aspect of their life. So any business plan that was written in December 2019 is moot for 3 reasons. One is the people you're talking to have changed. That's number one. Number two, the technology has completely changed. The CFOs that I recently spoke to say they've accelerated their technology investment by 8 years. So we have basically more people obviously doing e-commerce, more people with remote work, more people with the cloud, a whole bunch of other things. And the third one is because they've been sitting at home rethinking things, plus you have all this technology, they've also been asking questions with regard to marketing, marketers, and companies, which is, do you exist for any reason in addition to extracting money from my pocket? So basically they're saying, can you keep me safe? Can you help my families be more secure? And what role are you playing in society? So a changed mindset and changed behaviors, making all December 2019 plans moot, is the big shift.
Are there winners and losers from this?
Yes.
And who are they?
So, broadly, I believe what has tended to happen is, from a financial perspective, the existing winners have become more of winners, and the people who were harder off have become even more worse off if you're a frontline worker, etc. But I think because of the reality that a frontline worker is someone who, whether they are delivering your groceries or a nurse at a hospital, cannot be replaced by someone in Costa Rica, but I can, okay? So what is basically happening is you're going to see the strength of unions and the strength. So the people we were not paying attention to are now going to have to be paid attention to. And people like myself, someone's going to basically say, we can find a better, cheaper version of him because in effect, I can get talent from anywhere. Because one of the implications that I believe that most people do not know or do not, I think, completely understand is there are businesses where you have to physically be where you are. If you're a dentist, if you're working in a factory, right? Sometimes even for telemarketers. For most of us, it doesn't matter where we are. And as a result, most companies at the board level, when they're talking about hybrid, they're not talking the way the press talks about it, 50-50, some days at work, some days at home. No, it's primarily you're sitting at home, wherever that is, and 1 week in 13, you come to a location somewhere in the country.
I want to go back. That's all I know. I have 2 kids at home and I'm ready to run out the door.
Yes, and obviously, but part of it, by the way, for those who want to do 13 weeks,
Yeah.
they will basically have the equivalent of WeWorks near where your kids study versus you having to go back and forth. So that's going to be, so I think there's going to be a benefit to people who were not well looked after. There's also going to be a benefit to people who can self-direct themselves. There's going to be a real challenge for people who required pomp and circumstances to operate.
So you've basically told us about 10 different challenges that were basically in that little opening. But if you were to pick, what do you think the biggest one is facing the business that we're in, right? That you're in, the biggest challenge facing the marketers out there, and also the entire sector, media agencies. What is that challenge that you think they're going to have to cope with this year?
The single biggest challenge is to change their own mindsets. So there are 3 mindsets which all of us, not they, all of us have to open up to. One is if you're a large marketer relative to a smaller marketer. So if you're one of these 8 million long tail companies, right, everything is fine. If you're a larger marketer, make no mistake, the big platforms are coming after you. They don't like me saying so, but I understand.
Yeah.
So far, I've been right all these years. I know exactly what's going on, and I'm deep into those companies. The platforms are coming after you because their next $1 trillion are going to come to disrupt your business, not the small business. And they're being funded by the small people. So that's number one. So, and thinking that data and technology is going to save you is ridiculous, right? Data is like electricity. Tell me which, you can't do without it, but tell me which company goes running around saying we got better electric usage, therefore we're a better company. Ridiculous. Okay, so that's number one. There are a few, but very few. That's one. The second mindset shift is that think about the fact that the biggest person that you have, or the most important person you have, is not your customer, but the citizen. So you don't think about the consumer, think about the citizen. Because if you optimize for the consumer, you basically have weaponized social media, right? Because and people have become smart post-COVID because of what society. So they're basically thinking, and you know, the conference board, everybody has been saying things like this, but now you better deliver because people are saying, what the hell? So think about citizen versus consumer. And the third shift is that often all of us in management are the problem. And it's very hard for us to accept it, which is if you want to see a problem, look in the mirror. Also, by the way, the solution might be in the mirror, but look at in the mirror. And here's why. Here are the things I hear, which I think are pretty ridiculous. The first one is, we need some new thinking, so we're going to have a junior board. Okay. I say, why don't you have the junior board is your board, and then maybe you provide some advice. They know more than you do about where the world is. The generational shift between the way people are looking at this, number one, and the second is to get outside thinking, which is you're thinking exactly the opposite. So upgrading your own talent, thinking about citizen versus consumer, and thinking that differently about technology and data.
Okay, so you've given me 3 answers to that. I want to pick apart one of them. You've been on this sort of horn for a really long time about sort of the platforms, the tech giants, and how they are basically wake up marketers. They're going to be in your business soon. Lots of sort of hand wringing in the ad business had been about how those companies were going to take out advertising. And you and I both agree, they looked at the margins of the business of the advertising and said, that's not what they really want. You've been sort of touting this for a number of years. Have boards recognized that? Do CEOs of companies get that at this point? Or are they starting to awaken to this issue?
Most boards are between starting to wake up to being wide awake, right? There's almost no one asleep. Here's the reason why what changed. COVID-19 changed them because they began to actually understand the importance of this. Protests like the Black Lives Matter began to realize that they needed to optimize for something besides the consumer. The younger generations were saying to them, why are you funding this? So younger generations were going to the boards and saying, what is going on? So that was one reason they were doing it. But the second reason is people like myself basically now speak to the boards and we don't speak to the CMOs.
Right.
Okay. And when we go to, it goes, right. But when we go there, we don't talk about communications. We talk about marketing and business strategy, right? And the moment, like for instance, some boards did not understand that they were bidding against other people for Google and Facebook's business, that they were going to bid away all their margin because they grew up remembering that the media companies bid against each other for their business.
Yeah.
Right, which is number one. Number two, they did not realize that the treasure trove of data that these people had were going to create completely new businesses. And the businesses that they're going after is 40% of the US economy, or 40% of the GDP, which most of these clients are in. So that's what's woken them up. Now, I'm not against these platforms. I think you have to partner with these platforms, but be very careful thinking that these platforms are doing it for anybody but themselves.
Do you think, though, because you're saying there is this sort of awakening that's happened at the tops of these companies, are companies figuring out strategies on how to do this in a way, how to be, build up resiliency so they're not as dependent or codependent on them? And
Yes.
And how is that manifesting itself?
So the way it's manifesting itself is almost everyone is following what I call a short, medium, and long-term plan. The short term being 1 year, the medium term being 3 years, and the long term being 5 years. Okay. So this is what they're doing. Almost every company in some form or the other is doing this. The long term is they want to be in a place where they can no longer depend on any particular platform, that they can almost dial them down to 10% or things like that. That's going to take them 5 years from where they are today. Okay, literally, but unfortunately, that's where they are. It'll take them 5 years. It's not that they won't stop using them, but they need to be able to say no. It's like when you're on drugs, you have to slowly get off, right? That's number one. In the short term, which is 1 year, they're going to pressurize every time there's an event. They're pressurizing these folks as to, we want access to our data. Where is the transparency? How are you doing things? And the other thing they're doing in the short run is they're moving money. I know I'm working with a lot of people. They're having plans to move money in the next year to other platforms. So you'll see money basically going from the Googles and Facebooks to the Snaps and TikToks and Pinterest and the New York Times Digital and all these other things, which is like, let me move money over.
I'm just going to stop you because you said you're going to see that, but if you've paid it, like if you just look at what's happened in the last 2 days, those companies, despite the Facebook boycott, despite an insurrection in DC, had blowout quarters, blowout years amid COVID. So where is sort of the proof that we're actually seeing that in the numbers? Because yes, we saw Twitter and Snap have decent quarters in the past, but usually it was because there was this boycott going on just for that slight 1 month.
Right, but look at how Snap is doing. Look at how TikTok is doing. They're blowing Facebook and Google out of the water, right? I mean, you should
Not
see what's going to
financially.
happen. Not yet, but if you were invested in Snap, you do better than Facebook in the past 6 months or a year, right? TikTok, you can't actually buy TikTok, but the TikTok is at a 10x growth rate. 10x. It's not like 2x, 3x. So what basically is happening is more money is coming into digital. So if you're a digital leader, you're going to but their share is going to go down. The plan is to make the share go down. These people are going to continue to be important. The plan is to get back to where you have some flexibility, right? The other one that they're doing in the short run, which is extremely important, is they are lobbying up, right? I don't know whether they're doing it with the ANA or who they're doing it with, but they're lobbying up because the plan also is to get these people broken up. Because remember, if you basically have them broken up and you can move money off and and then the last thing that they're doing, which is the 3-year plan. So the short run, it's lobby, move some money. Long term is how do we get out? In the 3-year plan is direct relationships with customers.
You actually just answered my other question for you, because basically we've seen time and time again that, big brands who really don't have enough firepower in terms of pulling money off the platforms because they grow at the expense of the small businesses.
Right.
That doesn't really work.
So
you talked about how they're lobbying.
That is absolutely essential. And so one of the key things, like I myself have done, is I've shown that when I started my, Future Doesn't Fit and Contains the Past Substack email, what it basically did is I was reaching more people faster than if I put all my stuff on social media, because they were not promoting it. So now I have a direct relationship with 10,000 people without any of them. And so marketers are saying, how did you do it? I said, you'll run billions of dollars and you aren't doing it. And I'm doing it as a starving author. Come on, people, give me a break, right? So it's very doable, but obviously in their case, it requires a 3-year plan. But anybody who is in a position 2 years from now, as they were before Black Lives Matter, to basically say they don't have options should be fired.
Right. So if you say that there's lobbying going on by companies for a breakup, what do you think if these companies were broken up, how does that help or does that hurt brands?
I think it basically helps depending on how it gets broken up. So for instance, the sense whether it'll happen and what will happen will take some time. But to me, the very simple breakups are, in the case of Facebook, it's WhatsApp versus Instagram versus Facebook. And I will tell you without a doubt, Zuckerberg will go run WhatsApp, which is why he's fighting with Tim Cook, because WhatsApp is the closest he can get to WeChat, right? Facebook is yesterday. Instagram is very much today. WhatsApp is tomorrow. In the case of Google, they cannot be everything. They can't basically be the ad ecosystem and the server and the browser and the thing. That's stupid. That should never have been allowed, right? So there's going to be a breakup, including, by the way, if YouTube is separate from Google search, YouTube will launch YouTube search and Google will launch video. Okay, so make no mistakes. The whole world isn't static. And by the way, everyone will benefit. Consumers will benefit. Clients will benefit. Shareholders will benefit because these companies separated are worth more than together.
I want to switch to a little bit more of keeping them sort of in focus, but switch a little bit to sort of the privacy push that we're seeing. And obviously there's been so much talk about, what Apple's move is going to be and how Google's going to replace the third-party cookies. Do you think when we talk about Google and sort of their new path, let's say, do you think that actually caused brands to even shift more money and more spending to Google, right? There's already in the UK an antitrust regulator that's basically opened up a formal probe to figure out if this is actually going to cause advertisers to shift even more money to Google. We saw this with GDPR in the beginning, right? Everybody was like, this is going to be the end of the big tech companies. And actually a lot of people ran to them because they had the first party data. When you think about all the sort of the strings that are out there, does this sort of help or hinder those companies?
All of these companies will continue to do very well for 5-10 years, long after you and I are no longer even around, right? So that's without a doubt there. And they're very important partners and they're good people and good people most of the time. But with that being said, here's what I think the answer is this. In the near term, things might help, but seeing what happened both with GDPR, with Black Lives Matter, and what's recently happened with people being kicked off the certain platforms, right? Marketers and business people have basically realized that they better get a grip on their future, right? The big difference, the very big difference is instead of this being a CMO level discussion, it is now a board level discussion, which is what it has always needed to be. My basic belief is every company should have a CMO on their board. If they do not have a CMO on their board, they should have the CMO presenting to the board. And they should have for every quarterly meeting 1 hour on what is our 3, 5, 1, 3, and 5 year strategy with the platforms, not against the platforms. What's our platform with the strategy? What's our ups? What's our downs? What's our optionality? What's our strategy? What's our reputational risk? That is starting to happen. That is starting to happen because this is so important. It's not about a brand. It's about the future of company and society, and it has to be a board level thing.
Right, because what's interesting is we've seen this happen now, especially post January 6th, right? Most companies, unlike years past, were very quick, tops of companies, CEOs putting out statements, pulling money from PACs or supporting certain elected officials. But then if you look down the food chain, lots of them are now starting to say, wait a minute, we can't talk from the CEO suite about having this purpose. And then all of a sudden we have to make sure how we act as a business, whether it's where we buy our media, how we talk to our consumers, it actually has to filter down. Do you see that reckoning within the halls of companies starting to take place? Because for a while now, there's been a very big disconnect from as far as I can see.
Obviously, I have a self-selected sample. So there are people who are working with me who I cannot name, right? But I have a half a dozen very big companies that I'm working with. Every one of those, this is a key part of the conversations that we're talking about, right? But they also recognize that this is not against the platforms, but it's like we will do in our business. That's one. But here's the other pressure that they really do have. The pressure they have both from their internal employees is so strong. I think people don't realize how important it is. And then the other one is they're all beginning to realize that there is a new ESG in addition to the old ESG. And the old ESG was basically environment, social, and governance.
Yeah.
The new ESG, which the old one is still very important, is employee, society, and government, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we look after employees? What's our implications for society? And what are we doing for good government, which is what you're beginning to see.
And it's all going to come from the ground up. You've seen that in multiple companies now where there's been an uprising from the bottom of the companies, and it's going to filter all the way to the top. So it's true that that's how it's happening.
And the most important thing is they no longer, I wouldn't say they're no longer, but they're less and less scared of these platforms. Because the one key thing is these platforms kept everybody quiet, right? Not me, obviously, because I'm an idiot, but they kept everybody else quiet. I of course, don't understand anything. So that's a different thing. But they would always find ways to keep people quiet. That is finished. And you will see people come out in the next year or two in ways nobody expects. So my whole stuff is like, get real now, right? And talk real business. Don't look here and talk there and say this and do that. That doesn't work anymore.
Get real. Okay. Rishad, as always, you always bring it. Thanks so much for taking this time to chat with me this afternoon. I really appreciate it. It looks like 2021 is not going to be that calm.
No, absolutely. Thank you.